For centuries, sailors disappeared at sea by the thousands. Their bodies weakened, their gums bled, their teeth fell out, and eventually they became too weak to stand. Entire crews could be destroyed by a disease no one understood. Then, almost by accident, a small yellow fruit became one of the most important tools in the history of medicine. Lemons didn't just add flavor to food. They helped transform ocean travel, protect sailors, expand empires, and save millions of lives. But the story of the lemon begins thousands of years before anyone understood why it worked. The lemon we know today is not an ancient wild fruit. It is a hybrid, and its story begins far from the Mediterranean, in the forests of Asia. Long before lemons appeared in European kitchens, citrus fruits were already being cultivated across parts of South and Southeast Asia. Ancient farmers were selecting plants for their size, flavor, fragrance, and usefulness. Over generations, different citrus species crossed and produced entirely new fruits. The lemon was one of those creations. It emerged from a complicated family tree involving citron and other ancient citrus varieties, most likely somewhere in Asia. At first, it was not the bright yellow fruit we recognize today. It was part of a much larger world of citrus plants that included oranges, mandarins, pomelos, and other varieties. Humans moved these plants. Merchants carried seeds. Farmers planted them in new climates. Rulers collected exotic fruits. And slowly, citrus traveled westward. By the first millennium, lemons had reached parts of the Middle East. Arab agricultural knowledge played an important role in spreading citrus cultivation throughout the Mediterranean. Farmers learned how to grow citrus in different soils. Irrigation systems allowed orchards to flourish in dry regions. And lemons became valuable for more than eating. Their juice could flavor food. Their fragrance could be used in perfumes. Their acidity could help preserve certain foods. The peel could be used in cooking and medicine. But the most important use of lemons was still unknown. For centuries, people had no idea that lemons contained a substance capable of preventing one of the deadliest diseases faced by sailors: vitamin C. The body needs it to produce collagen and maintain healthy tissues. Without enough of it, a person eventually develops scurvy. The symptoms are horrifying: extreme weakness, swollen and bleeding gums, loose teeth, bruising, poor wound healing, eventually internal bleeding and death. Today, the solution seems obvious. Eat foods containing vitamin C. But for most of human history, nobody knew what vitamins were. And that ignorance became catastrophic when humans began spending months at sea. By the age of exploration, European ships were crossing oceans for longer and longer periods. They carried weapons, water, grain, salted meat, hard biscuits, but fresh fruits and vegetables were difficult to preserve. Within weeks, sailors were living almost entirely on stored food, and stored food had a dangerous weakness. It contained almost no vitamin C. At first, nobody understood the connection. Sailors simply became sick. Some ships lost enormous portions of their crews before reaching their destinations. The disease became one of the great invisible killers of the maritime world. It didn't matter how strong the ship was, how experienced the captain was, how powerful the navy was. Scurvy could destroy them all. And the strangest part was that sailors sometimes recovered when ships reached land. Fresh fruit appeared. Fresh vegetables appeared. The disease began to disappear. Then the ship left again. And months later the symptoms returned. The pattern had been visible for centuries, but medicine was still searching for the wrong explanation. Some doctors blamed bad air. Others blamed spoiled food. Some believed the disease was caused by exhaustion, salt, cold, or the general misery of life at sea. The real answer was sitting inside something remarkably simple: a fruit. But before science discovered that answer, one of the most important experiments in medical history would take place aboard a British naval ship. And it would involve something that looked almost absurdly ordinary: oranges, lemons, and sailors who were slowly dying. In 1747, a British naval surgeon named James Lind decided to investigate the mystery. Lind was serving aboard HMS Salisbury, a ship in the Royal Navy. The crew was suffering from scurvy. Instead of simply accepting the disease as another unavoidable part of life at sea, Lind decided to conduct an experiment. He selected 12 sailors who were suffering from similar symptoms. Then he divided them into groups. Each group received a different treatment. Some were given cider. Others received vinegar. One group was given seawater. Another received mixtures of spices. And 2 sailors were given oranges and lemons. The results were astonishing. The sailors who received citrus fruit improved dramatically. While the other treatments produced little meaningful change, the men eating oranges and lemons began recovering. Lind had discovered one of the most important clues in the history of nutritional medicine. Fresh citrus could prevent and treat scurvy. But there was a problem. The discovery didn't immediately transform the British Navy. Lind published his findings in 1753, but the medical world was slow to accept them. Scientists still didn't understand vitamins. They didn't know what substance inside citrus was responsible. They didn't understand why fresh fruit worked. And the practical problem was enormous. How could a navy keep enough fresh lemons or oranges available for sailors spending months at sea? Fresh fruit spoiled, ships couldn't carry unlimited supplies, and long voyages could take sailors thousands of miles away from any orchard. For decades, the Royal Navy struggled to turn Lind's discovery into standard practice. Eventually, however, the British found a solution. They began supplying sailors with lemon juice. Then, in the early 19th century, lemons became increasingly important to British naval policy. Ships carried barrels of citrus juice for long voyages. Sailors were given regular rations. The effect was enormous. Scurvy rates dropped dramatically. British sailors became healthier, and the Navy gained an enormous advantage over rivals whose crews were still being devastated by the disease. But there was an unexpected twist. The British eventually switched from lemon juice to lime juice. Limes were cheaper and easier to obtain from British colonies. The change seemed harmless, but limes contain less vitamin C than lemons, and the juice was sometimes processed in ways that reduced its effectiveness. Still, the sailors continued receiving citrus. The basic protection remained, and the British sailor became associated with the nickname limey, a word that would survive long after the original medical reason had been forgotten. The importance of citrus went far beyond the British Navy. Scurvy had shaped the history of exploration itself. Think about what happens when a ship loses half its crew. Navigation becomes harder. Sails become harder to manage. Weapons become harder to operate. Disease spreads. Morale collapses. A voyage that should take months can become a disaster. Scurvy didn't simply kill individuals. It could destroy expeditions. It could weaken navies. It could change the outcome of wars. And because the disease was connected to something as simple as diet, the solution was surprisingly cheap. A fruit. That realization gradually changed maritime medicine. But there was still one major problem. Why did citrus work? Nobody knew. For more than a century after Lind's experiment, scientists continued searching for the missing explanation. Then, in the early 20th century, the field of nutrition began changing rapidly. Researchers discovered that certain diseases were caused not by bacteria or viruses, but by the absence of essential substances in food. These substances would eventually be called vitamins. Vitamin C was finally identified as the key nutrient preventing scurvy. The mystery that had killed sailors for centuries suddenly had a biological explanation. Citrus fruits were rich in vitamin C. Without it, the human body could not maintain connective tissue properly. With enough of it, the disease could be prevented. The discovery was revolutionary. It changed medicine's understanding of food. Food wasn't simply fuel. It contained invisible substances essential to human survival. A person could eat enough calories to avoid starvation and still become severely ill because one tiny nutrient was missing. That idea transformed nutrition forever. And lemons were right at the center of the story. But lemons weren't only saving sailors. Their cultivation was expanding across the globe. European empires carried citrus trees to new colonies. Portuguese and Spanish explorers introduced citrus to parts of the Americas. Lemon orchards appeared in regions where the climate allowed them to flourish. Mediterranean countries became major producers. The fruit was no longer an exotic ingredient imported from distant lands. It was becoming a global crop, and as production increased, lemons became cheaper. They moved from royal kitchens into ordinary homes. People used them in drinks, cooking, preserves, medicine, cleaning. Even as the scientific mystery surrounding scurvy was finally solved, the lemon was beginning another transformation. It was becoming an everyday fruit. But its greatest contribution to human health was only the beginning. Because once scientists understood what vitamin C could do, they began asking a much bigger question. How many other diseases were caused by missing nutrients? And the answer would change modern medicine forever. By the beginning of the 20th century, the mystery of scurvy was finally starting to make sense. But the discovery of vitamin C revealed something much bigger. Human beings could become seriously ill, even when they were eating enough food. The problem wasn't always starvation. Sometimes, it was what was missing. This changed the way scientists thought about nutrition. For centuries, medicine had focused heavily on disease, infection, and external causes of illness. Now researchers were discovering that the human body depended on tiny chemical substances hidden inside ordinary foods. A deficiency could be just as dangerous as a disease, and citrus fruits became some of the most famous sources of these mysterious nutrients. Lemons were especially valuable because they were relatively easy to transport, store, and use. Their juice could be mixed with water. Their acidity helped preserve certain foods, and their distinctive flavor made them easier to consume regularly. The humble lemon had become part of modern nutritional science. But there was another reason lemons became so important. They were incredibly adaptable. Citrus trees could flourish across large parts of the Mediterranean, southern Europe, the Middle East, and eventually the Americas. As European powers expanded overseas, they carried citrus seeds and young trees with them. Spanish colonists planted lemons in the Caribbean and the Americas. Portuguese traders helped spread citrus through their global network. Lemon cultivation eventually expanded into regions with warm climates around the world. A fruit that had originated from a complex history of Asian citrus plants was now growing on multiple continents. And the more lemons farmers produced, the cheaper they became. This mattered because medicine only saves lives when people can actually access it. A rare medicinal substance can be scientifically remarkable and practically useless. Lemons were different. They could be grown, harvested, transported, stored, and consumed by ordinary people. Their medical importance wasn't dependent on a laboratory, it was dependent on agriculture. That connection between farming and medicine would become increasingly important throughout the 20th century. As nutrition science advanced, governments began recommending greater consumption of fruits and vegetables. Vitamin C became associated with citrus. School children were encouraged to eat fresh produce. Military organizations made sure soldiers had access to sources of essential nutrients. And sailors were no longer disappearing by the thousands from scurvy. One of history's great killers had become largely preventable. But the lemon had another trick. Its usefulness wasn't limited to nutrition. Its acidity made it valuable in cleaning. Its oils were used in perfumes. Its peel became an ingredient in cooking and confectionery. Its juice was used in beverages and sauces. Even its fragrance became commercially valuable. Few fruits had such a wide range of applications. And as industrialization accelerated, companies found ways to turn nearly every part of the fruit into a commercial product. Lemon oil, lemon extract, concentrated juice, candied peel, citric acid. The lemon became an ingredient in industries that had nothing to do with fresh fruit, and one of its most important chemical components became even more valuable: citric acid. It occurs naturally in lemons and gives them their characteristic sour taste. But industrial production eventually made it possible to manufacture citric acid on a massive scale. Suddenly, manufacturers didn't need to depend entirely on squeezing enormous quantities of lemons. The compound itself could be produced commercially and used in food, beverages, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and cleaning products. The lemon had inspired an entire chemical industry. Yet there was an important irony. The same scientific progress that made lemon products cheaper also made the original fruit less necessary for many industrial purposes. Technology could reproduce some of what nature had provided, but the fresh lemon remained uniquely useful. Its juice contained vitamin C. Its aroma came from a complex mixture of natural compounds. Its peel contained essential oils, and its flavor could transform an otherwise ordinary meal. By the middle of the 20th century, lemons had become completely ordinary. They were sold in supermarkets, served in restaurants, added to tea, squeezed over fish, used in desserts. Nobody needed an expedition to obtain them. Nobody needed a royal treasury. And nobody needed to understand the chemistry behind vitamin C. That was precisely what made their history so extraordinary. One of the most important medical discoveries in human history had become almost invisible. The sailors who once depended on citrus had been replaced by consumers who simply wanted a slice of lemon in their water. But the story of the lemon also revealed something darker about the history of medicine. For centuries, thousands of people died from a disease that had a remarkably simple solution. The knowledge existed in pieces. Sailors observed that fresh food helped. Doctors conducted experiments. Some treatments worked, but without understanding the underlying biology, the medical establishment struggled to turn scattered observations into universal knowledge. The lesson was profound. Knowing that something works is not the same as understanding why it works. And sometimes, the difference between those two discoveries can cost millions of lives. Today, vitamin C deficiency is much less common in places with reliable access to fresh food. But scurvy hasn't disappeared completely. It can still occur when people have extremely limited diets or poor access to nutritious foods. The disease that once devastated entire ships can still appear in the modern world. The difference is that we now know exactly what causes it, and we know how simple the solution can be. Fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, and enough vitamin C. A lesson that took humanity thousands of years to understand. Yet the lemon's journey was far from over. Because as it became one of the world's most familiar fruits, it was about to become something else entirely. A symbol, a flavor, a household ingredient, and one of the most recognizable fruits on earth. Today, lemons are almost impossible to think of as a luxury. They sit in grocery stores by the thousands. They are squeezed into water, added to sauces, baked into desserts, preserved in jars, and used in kitchens across the world. Most people don't think twice before cutting one open. But that ordinary yellow fruit carries a history that stretches across continents and thousands of years. It began as a hybrid created through generations of human cultivation in Asia. It traveled along ancient trade routes. It reached the Mediterranean. It crossed oceans with explorers. And eventually, it became one of the most important fruits in the history of nutrition. Its greatest achievement was not making food taste better. It was helping humanity understand something fundamental about the human body. For centuries, sailors died because their diets were missing something they couldn't see. There was enough food, enough calories, enough meat and grain to keep people alive, and yet their bodies slowly began to break down. The answer was hidden inside fresh fruit, a substance so small that it couldn't be seen. Vitamin C. That discovery changed medicine forever. It proved that food could contain invisible substances essential to life. It showed that nutrition could prevent disease, and it opened the door to an entirely new field of scientific research. Today, we take vitamins for granted. We see them listed on nutrition labels. We buy supplements in supermarkets. We learn about them in school. But that knowledge was built on centuries of suffering. People had to die before scientists understood what their bodies were missing. The lemon became one of the simplest symbols of that transformation. But its story also reveals something about technology. The sailors of the 18th century needed fresh citrus. Modern sailors don't. Ships can carry preserved foods, refrigerated ingredients, and vitamin supplements. Modern medicine has made it possible to prevent scurvy without relying on barrels of lemon juice. Yet the fruit remains, because sometimes the simplest solution is also the most accessible. A lemon doesn't require a laboratory. It doesn't require a prescription. It doesn't require a complicated machine. It grows on a tree. That accessibility is part of what made it so powerful. A medicine that can be grown in ordinary soil can reach people in ways that expensive technology cannot. And the lemon became valuable for another reason. It tastes good. That sounds trivial. It isn't. A nutrient people actually enjoy consuming is much easier to incorporate into daily life. Lemon juice could be added to water, used in cooking, mixed into sauces, combined with other foods. The same fruit that protected sailors from disease could also become part of ordinary meals. Medicine and food became the same thing. That may be the most beautiful part of its story. The lemon never looked like a revolutionary object. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a rare mineral. It was simply a fruit. Yet that fruit helped solve a problem that had defeated physicians for centuries. It helped transform naval health. It influenced the history of exploration. It contributed to the development of nutritional science. And it eventually became part of everyday life for billions of people. The next time you see a lemon, it's easy to think of it as something ordinary. Something you squeeze over fish. Something you add to tea. Something sitting quietly in the refrigerator. But there was a time when a handful of lemons could mean the difference between life and death aboard a ship. A time when sailors crossed entire oceans without understanding why their bodies were failing. A time when doctors searched for mysterious causes while the answer was growing on trees. And a time when one small experiment involving a few sailors, some oranges, and some lemons helped point medicine toward a completely new understanding of disease. The lemon didn't conquer the oceans. It didn't discover new continents. It didn't build empires. But it helped keep the people who did those things alive. And perhaps that's why its story deserves to be remembered. History often celebrates the people who traveled the farthest, the explorers who crossed oceans, the captains who commanded fleets, the scientists who made famous discoveries. But behind many of those achievements were ordinary things that quietly made them possible. Food, water, medicine, and sometimes a fruit. The lemon is one of those rare objects that looks completely ordinary only because its greatest achievement has already happened. Today, you can buy one for almost nothing. But for generations of sailors, the knowledge contained inside that fruit was priceless. It saved lives, it changed medicine, and it helped humanity understand that sometimes the most important discoveries aren't hidden in distant laboratories. They're hiding in the foods we have been eating all along. A yellow fruit, a simple glass of juice, a nutrient too small to see, and a lesson that took humanity thousands of years to learn. The next time you cut open a lemon, remember that you aren't just holding a fruit. You're holding a small piece of medical history, a fruit that crossed continents, changed diets, influenced exploration, and helped save millions of lives. All because long ago someone finally discovered that sometimes the difference between life and death can be as simple as a lemon.